Hello, hello, and welcome to Crime Craft. This time we have a special treat. We have Barb Goffman here. She's going to talk about short stories, which are near and dear to my heart because that is how I started. I'm Nev March. I'm going to do really quick, two quick announcements, and then I'll do a quick intro, and then we'll hear from Barb. Okay, that's our plan. So the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America has always got a lot of upcoming events. We're doing a good number of local events. There are 26, no, 28 local groups that we have created just so that people don't have to schlep miles and miles to meet other writers. So if any of you would like to meet someone local, send a quick note to president at MWA-NY.org or local groups with an S, local groups at MWA-NY.org. And we'll set you up. We know who's in your neighborhood and we'll send out the invites. We cannot share email addresses without permissions, but we can send out invites so that people know where to meet. So that's one thing we're doing right now. We also had the Leon Burstein Award for unpublished writers that will open next month in June. And it's a very short submission period because we need time to judge. All the committee members on the board are co-opted. They all get to be judges at different levels as round one and round two. And then there's money behind that award. It's a cash award of $4,000 to the first prize winner, $1,000 to the second prize winner. It is for unpublished writers, and it will be announced. The winners will be announced at Revels, which is my last announcement. Revels will now be in November. Hopefully less traffic to Manhattan, hopefully less expensive, and hopefully better weather. So for those three reasons, and we have a new location that as soon as we have a contract, I'll be able to announce. So fingers crossed, that should work. Okay, and now on to today's event. Today's event, we are so lucky to have Barb Goffman here. Hello, Barb. Welcome, welcome. She is oh my, a very acclaimed and very published writer. She's the 2024 recipient of the Golden Derringer Award for Lifetime Achievement given by the Short Mystery Fiction Society. She's won the Agatha Award 4 times, the McCavity twice, the Anthony Derringer, and the EQMM, that's your Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine Readers Award once as well. Oh my gosh. Barb was a finalist for Major Crime Writing Honors 48 times. You go, girl! Including 2 current nominations for the Anthony Award in the Best Short Story category and the Best Anthology category. Her stories have appeared in, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, Black Cat Weekly, Black Cat Mystery Magazine, and a number of anthologies. And she works on top of all of that. She works full time, I think, as a freelance editor, often focusing on cozy and traditional mysteries. She's an associate editor of Black Cat Weekly. So if you're subbing to Black Cat Weekly, she's likely to get your submission. Her newest story is Keep It Dark, published in Into Deep, a crime fiction magazine inspired by the Songs of Genesis. And with that, I'd like to welcome Barb to our Crime Craft.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. So I'm going to just turn it over to you, Barb. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about writing. And hey, we're all here with our pencils sharpened and ready to take some notes.
Um, okay. Um,
Yeah, so
so
I had sent some questions to Barb, and I just
Oh,
wanted
good,
to
good,
sort of
good.
go through a couple of them. But I just wanted to say that Barb, for the first couple of questions, I'm going to ask you to wear your writer's hat, rather than your editor's hat, and you could tell me if actually they're the same hat or not when you write. But we're going to sort of dive into a little bit onto the craft of short stories today because like Nev said, that's how she started. That's how a lot of people start with writing short stories, but they're not easy. Really good ones are I think even harder to write than novels in some ways. So let's start sort of at the beginning. And when you go to write your opening sentence, how do you approach crafting it? Like, what is it based on an idea? Is it some kind of information that you need to get through to the reader in that sort of shorthand right away?
Yes. Um, and let me just say before I start that the way I work is not going to be the way that anybody else works. Well, it might be, but everybody works differently. And if what I'm saying doesn't sound like the way you work, don't feel that you need to change yourself because the way you're going to create your best work is to be true to your own nature. So hopefully I will say things here today that will be helpful to you. But if something doesn't work for you, just disregard it. So, in the same vein, each story for me ends up being a little different because I might be what I want to show. You could open any story could open in any number of ways. It just depends on what you want to focus on. So if you want to show that if you want to give a hint that there's humor to come, you might open it in one way. And if you want to show that it's, dark, you might open it in another way. If you want to really get the setting in, you could work that in. Or if you're going to be showing that really it's the voice that's so important, you might do that. Ideally, you could do all of that together, right? But I would not put so much pressure on yourself that you feel you have to.
Now, when you say voice, can you just tell us what you mean by that? Because I think that's something that it might be for some of us, we're not really sure what that encompasses.
Um, to me, voice is creating a character that feels real versus somebody that just lies there flat on the page. Um, I, God, voices is it's like obscenity. It's one of those things you know it when you see it. Um, but
So okay, so for example, because so many of your stories really grip the reader from the first sentence, right? And I think you're right. It does a lot of those things that you just mentioned. If this is going to be a funny story, you have a funny first line, right? But that also has a lot to do with character, right? Because
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that because your character or your narrator or the person who's relating the story is saying it in a humorous vein, even though obviously it's going to be about murdery, stabby, kind of content. So when you say voice, is it possible to have like a funny voice in a mystery?
Oh, yeah. I love your cat. Um, so I sometimes I think examples are easier, so I'll give you an example. So this is from my story, A Tale of Two Sisters from the anthology Murder on the Beach. And this is the opening paragraph. My big sister Emma was no bridezilla, but heading into her wedding today, she'd been wound up so tight she was like a jack in the box ready to spring. Would the photographer be on time? Yes. Would a baby cry during the ceremony? Not so far. Would our beloved klutzy cousin Janelle trip on her bridesmaid's dress as she walked down the aisle? Yes, but she caught herself before she went splat. Thank goodness. So hopefully what you get from that is it's a lighter tone story. It hopefully sounds like how someone would talk out loud. It has intonation. It has it's not just saying I went to a wedding and this is what happened. It's being in someone's head and talking through them. Um, if you're creating, I think any character that you write about, you want to be that character as you're writing what they're thinking and saying. And hopefully, if you do that well, they will come out sounding like a real person, and that's voice.
And actually, that has something to do with my next question, which is how do you actually convey depth of a character within the confines of, you know, flash fiction, which could be, 800 words or 1,500 words or 5,000 words?
Um, one way to show depth of a character is to show what they care about. In my story, Beauty and the Biatch, the two main characters, Joni and Meryl, were both high school seniors, but they were very different people. Joni cared about what other kids thought of her because she wanted so much for people to like her. So, but her thought of what was important was different from others. So she thought, oh my God, does my shirt have wrinkles? And then she'd be berating herself. God, nobody cares about that. Whereas Meryl was always just more about wanting to make people happy. So I lost it. I lost the question, but I think I was getting there.
Yeah, I was talking about depth. Is so in this example, see, I think this is important too, because in this example, do you have two point of view characters or is there just really one?
In that story, I had two. Um,
Wow.
but you can show depth even if you of other characters, even if you just have one point of view, because one way to show depth is show how people react. And your main character could react in dialogue and an internal monologue, but other characters can show who they are just through what they say and how they say it. Um, and it also could be in how other one character describes another. Again, in Beauty and the Biatch, the mean girl character had they were walking out toward her car, and it's mentioned that it's was her she's also a high school senior. It was her 16th birthday present. It's this fancy car in custom teal paint because that's her favorite color. And that shows so much about who she is in just one or two sentences.
Yeah, that's really fascinating actually, because you're those kind of things do a lot of the heavy lifting for you as the writer, right? Because you're then conveying in a very short period of time who these people are, why they're going to react the way they do,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Detail can be very important, and just little bits here or there can really carry the water for you.
Um, so that brings me actually to conflict. How do you, when you start to write your story, do you start with conflict or do you start with character?
Um, it's going to be different every time. A lot of times I will. Well, are you talking? Let me ask. Talking about the writing process, or are you talking about the very beginning thought process?
I mean, I guess we could start from the beginning, which would be thought process, right?
Um, Oftentimes I will be reading something and I'll think, "Ooh, I could make something from that." Um, so, oh, what's a um? Let me see. Let me just think for a moment. Um,
And in
Oh,
the
we have a
meantime, guys, if
pause.
anyone has any questions for Barb, you can put them in the chat and I will be happy to ask her and clarify any so she can clarify any points if we're moving too fast.
um,
Excellent. And I also wanted to say I goofed. I should have introduced Kate. Kate Hull is our program chair, and she's running the interview. Sorry, sorry, sorry. She's doing a fantastic job. Thank you, Kate.
so, so I mean, sometimes I'll read something like in a newspaper article, and it'll just be like a character thing. And I'll be like, okay, maybe I can make use of that. Or sometimes it'll be a little plot thing, and I think I can make use of that. Um, and then I plot out a story, and it's usually at a high level. I will think, as if I were well, if I wanted to drive from here to New York, I would think, okay, I'll get on 81 and then I'll go through Pennsylvania and I'll get on this highway and I'll get on that highway. But I very well, well, not me personally, but there very well could be people who would be like, ooh, look, there's the biggest haystack in the world. Let's get off at this exit and see what happens here. And so you might be going from A to Z, and you might envision I'll stop at B and D, but suddenly you might stop at J and you don't expect that. And there's room for that. So I do that. I plot at a high level, but I leave myself room for figuring out what's going to come to make it more interesting.
I that actually is very interesting because I would that was actually going to be my next question, which is, do you plot or are you just sort of writing, writing, writing and then go back and edit?
I don't. I've written one story in my life that I just wrote by the seat of my pants, and it it turned out okay, but I must have rewritten that story at least 10 times before I got it published. And that's just not normal for me. Um, because it didn't work very well.
Right.
I need to know where I'm going. That's not to say that there are many times when I'll get further into a story, it can take me sometimes halfway or two-thirds of the story before I realize what it's really about. Because, well, I'm known for saying that, short stories are about just one thing. And I tell people that if you're going to write, you want to really focus. So, and I've said this before, if you're writing a story about a bank robbery, you don't want to start when the kid is 10 years old and show that, he really wanted that truck, but his mother wouldn't buy it for him. You want to show him in line at the bank, get him ready to pull out his gun. Or maybe you want to show him in the car on the drive over. But you don't want to start too early. But so that's focusing very tightly on the story, on just one thing. But as you get further into developing your craft, you can realize that writing a short story is also about really one thematic thing as well. I mean, so you're telling your tight tale, but you're also telling whatever message you want to give. So it's both of those things. And sometimes, at least for me, I don't know what that message is or what that theme is going to be until much later in the story. In my story, A Matter of Trust, the one that's up for the Anthony right now, I started that story wanting to show the dissolution of a marriage, and I did that. But it wasn't until I was two-thirds of the way through that I thought, oh, and I'm sorry, this is going to be spoiler alert. The story is about the long-term ramifications of childhood emotional abuse. Because that is why the main character became so screwed up and why he screwed up his marriage unintentionally. Um, and when I realized that, I went back to the beginning and I started looking for little places I could drop in little hints to show who his character is, so that as the story develops, you see it more and more. Um, and that's how I do that. That's often how I do that.
And that's why that story is up for an Anthony, because boy, that it's an incredible story, but getting all that in a short story, that's really that's
Thank
incredible. Um, so actually, Nev had a question. Do you put aside a story for a while to get distance from it? Or does it change when you return to it, or are you just do you sort of chug along and then just get it out?
I chug along. I mean, it depends on the story. The longer stories, it might take me longer. And like with A Tale of Two Sisters, that story, I promised that story to a particular anthology, and it just was not working for me. So I set that story aside for a few weeks, which is unusual. And that story had to be funny. And I just wasn't feeling in a funny mood when I started to write it. So I set it aside. And when I finally came back to it, I thought, okay, I need this. It felt flat. And then I realized, okay, how can I make this story funny? And I thought, okay, it's set at a wedding, so give the it was the maid of honor was the main character, and I thought, okay, give her a foil. So I created her mother, who was based on my mother, and they just went at each other, and that was funny. And as soon as I did that, and I heard the Wicked Witch of the West music in my head, it all worked. But that doesn't always, I mean, for me, that usually if I sit down to write, I can finish a story in 3, 4 days, especially if they're on the shorter end.
So this is going to be a little bit of a jog, and if I don't know, I hope other people are interested in this question too. You only have so much time when you write, time in your life. There's only 24 hours in a day. Strategically, how do you decide where you're going to try to publish your stuff? Right. In other words, if someone comes to you for an anthology, et cetera, like how do you prioritize? How do you decide that?
Um, Not very well. I don't like saying no to people, although a lot of people tell you I've said no to them a lot in the last few years. A lot of people know this, so it's not a secret. I went through a period 2, 3 years ago where I was having a reaction to a medication, and I didn't realize it, and it left me depressed and unable to concentrate. And I went for a year and a half or so without writing a single word.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I told, I was just telling people no, I can't do it because I didn't know if I'd ever be able to write anything. Um, and even now, I still to this day the one one effect of that medication, or maybe it's just me changing, is I'm having a hard time concentrating at times. So I'm not accepting as when people come to me, I'm like, oh, that's really nice. I wish I could be in the anthology. Your deadline's in 2 months. No, I'll never be able to get that done.
Right.
Um, the farther away a deadline is, the more I think, oh, yeah, sure, I'll be able to find a week sometime between now and next April. And then in March, I'll be like, why did I say yes?
Yeah, it's that party that you said yes to 6 months ago, and now it's the night before, and you're like, oh no, why did I say I was gonna go?
Why did I say I'd come here today, Kate?
Right.
Why did I do that to myself?
Exactly.
But ideally, I would like to, give stories to some anthologies because I think anthologies are great.
Yeah,
But I also would like to submit to Ellery Queen and Alfred Hitchcock, and I haven't sent either of those magazines anything in at least 4 years because I just haven't had any time. And anytime I have time to write, I've promised something to somebody.
right, right. Very interesting. Um, for people starting out, anthologies can be a good way to go, yes?
It was for me. And there are two trains of thought for this. Um, when I started out, I okay, I this was in 2004, and the my local sync chapter put out a call for stories for an anthology, and then I had no desire to submit because I didn't write short stories. I didn't read short stories. Um, and the deadline came, the deadline went, and then they announced that they were reopening because they didn't get enough good stories. And I was working on a novel, and I thought, wow, okay. If they don't have enough good stories, maybe I could write something and get a credit and use that in my cover letter and sell my novel. So I sat down to write a short story, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, the heavens opened up, and I realized what I was doing all this time. And I started reading them, and I started writing them, and here we are, 20 years later. So I mean, that's true. That story opened a lot of doors for me. It got me an Agatha nomination on my first published work.
Wow.
Although honestly, I got into this. I Lots of secrets. I got into this business at a very good time for me. I got very lucky because if that story were submitted now, it would not get an Agatha nomination. The quality of the work being published these days is so high. Um, But anyway, so I wrote it and it got published in the Stink anthology, and I think that can be really good for people, especially if you're not sure of yourself. I mean, anthologies, especially Stink anthologies, you could be a fish in a small pond because there's if the number of people who could submit is limited to the chapter members, you don't have as much competition. So
Right.
so that can be good for you. But at the same time, don't count yourself out. Today, I would have told, well, not that story. But today I would tell those people, send it to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. They have a department of first stories, which is what they call in every issue they publish one or two stories from first time writers. Um, and when you submit, there's a box you check on their electronic submission form that says, is this eligible for the Department of First Stories? And if it is, they will read it with a different eye because you're only going up against other first time writers for that spot versus we're instead of everybody. And there is no reason not to try to start at the top. If you don't get into Ellery Queen, then yeah, maybe look around and see what your other options are. But why not try?
I'm really glad you brought that up because I am actually I benefited from that greatly. My first story was published in the Department of First Stories, and then I actually won the Robert L. Fish Award. And I
Okay?
know that one of my friends on here, Bill, he was one of my fellow nominees that year, and the stories are all excellent in my opinion. I go right to first stories and Ellery Queen, but I do recommend doing that because you never know.
Right. I mean, every year, 12 to 24 people.
That's
Their
right.
stories are accepted that way.
That's right. That's right. Um, so I have a couple questions from members that I want to ask you. So Andy asks, how much research would you do for a story as opposed to a novel? And do you tend to favor certain known settings?
Um, I'm going to give you the answer that I heard Laura Lippman give once, which is I I do enough research to make sure that what I want to have happen in the story is possible. And then later I might do some more research if I need to fill in some details. But it I have known many writers who waste time. Well, they would not call it wasting time, who spend time going down the rabbit hole of research. And you realize that like 3 months have passed and you haven't written anything, but you know all this great stuff. And then you feel like, oh, I know all this great stuff. I need to put it in there because spend so much time on research, and you don't want your research to show. For every, every book that you read on a particular topic, you might end up getting one or two sentences into your story on that subject, and that'll be enough. So I I don't do that much research. I just do enough to know what I need. But also, so much of what I do, especially these days, are stories that are based on things that happened to me. Um, I mine my past. I figure if something happened to me when I was young that resonates with me 40 years later, it'll be something I can use in a story. And I don't need to look that stuff up because, I remember what my favorite song was when I was a senior in high school, etc.
Which was?
Oh, now you're going to put me on the spot.
I'm only kidding.
It was James, and also Summer Highland Falls. I'm from Long Island, so Billy Joel rules.
Always, yes. Um, Andy Boyle says, what is the most insightful or helpful feedback you've received from an editor?
In Beauty and the Biatch, my editor was that appeared in Sherlock Holmes Mystery Magazine, and um, well, they had recently moved to all pastiches, but back then they were just publishing, good story, any good story. So, Carla read through the story and she came back to me and she said, sometimes these high school characters sound like they're 40-year-old women. And I'm like, well, that's a good point. So I went back and I looked through the things that they focused on, and I made some changes. So the opening sentence of the story ended up being, um, "My heart was beating so hard you'd think I'd been dumped at the prom." But that was not the original opening sentence. I don't remember what it was, but it was oh, I think it was something about clutching my pearls. Not something a kid would think, or especially a kid today would think.
Right.
Um, so yeah, listen to your editors. I mean, you don't have to take every edit that somebody gives you, but especially if it's somebody knows their stuff, listen.
And Neb has a question. Do short stories help you with writing a novel, or are they different skills?
Um, both. I think short stories teach you how to write tight, and that's going to be important in anything you do, because novels might be long, but they should be longer because you're telling a more longer story and a more enriched story, but not just because you babble and you use a lot of extra words. Um, well, short stories are also, I mean, they're different because they're very focused. I don't know. People have asked me over the years, have I ever had any short stories that could have been a novel? And the answer is no. I kind of always get a feel for what's going to work. Oh, Kitty, hi. Um, does that help at all, Nev? Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I do get that there's two sides to it. Keeping it focused is it's a challenge when you have so many things to say, and definitely it is a key skill for short story writers. That's why most stories get diffused if you aren't able to keep it narrow. Um, totally get that. I also get that each chapter is a little bit of a short story, so you
Um,
gotta.
actually, I've seen some short stories published in anthologies. So sometimes I've seen anthologies where there'll be like, you know, a lot of short story writers who I might know or, no, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I shut my freaking phone off. Um,
Always happens. Don't worry. Yeah.
and then there'll be one story by a really big name author that they got in there. And I'll read the story and I'll be like, well, that was the first chapter of a novel. That clearly was the first chapter of a novel. It's not a short story. I mean, a chapter could be a short story if it's written the right way, but not usually because a short story needs a beginning, a middle, and it has to have a good end.
Yeah, yeah, the closing. Whereas in a novel, you really want a hook. You want it to keep open so that they read the next chapter. So you don't want to close it too completely. I gotcha. I gotcha. Very neat. I'll just add on this little thought that occurred to me. There's a bunch of writers that say that the short story is really the end of a novel. It's the thing that happens at the end. What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I guess. It, yeah, I mean, it all depends on how you write it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I hear you.
in my Whodunit, the postman always flirts twice. The story ends with the main character having figured out who the killer is and having an emotional conversation.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if that novel, if I had written that as a novel, it wouldn't have ended there because, we would have needed to see the police, what happened, who did they arrest, what did they do? It's just different.
I hear you. Thanks.
Um, so actually my thought on the whole it, is it is it at the end of a novel or whatever? Could you use a short story as a roadmap to a novel in a sense? In other words, rather than an outline, I mean, could you do something like that? I guess you could, right?
I mean, theoretically, like the postman always flirts twice. It's a whodunit. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, if you had the skill, you could take that and create a much bigger story and showing you the beginning. Not, I mean, the short story opens, the guy's already dead, but he doesn't have to be.
Right.
And one of the main characters is afraid she's going to be arrested, and we hear about that from her, but we could have seen it. We could have seen the police come and go into her house and interrogate her or whatever. I mean, yeah, you could.
I'm thinking at least a novella for
Yeah,
for
you
that one,
could.
right? Why not?
Yeah, or not.
Um, okay, so Marjorie asks, do you know the reader real or imagine that you are talking to? Do you, I guess, like, do you picture an audience or no?
No, no, I write for myself, and if I like it, I figure other people like it too.
Yeah, because
Especially
she
when
says,
I'm for my funny stuff. If I make myself laugh, I figure that's good.
right, she's clarifying. She says, readers you may know or not, but are trying to convince. I'm not sure how to ask this question. I only move into my own voice when this is true.
Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to state that again for you. So I guess it's really, I guess you sort of answered the question. You said, you're writing not for yourself, you're writing for a reader, but you're not doing it for a particular audience.
well, I mean, if I know I'm writing a story for a noir magazine, I'm going to write a different story than if I were writing something for a humor magazine because I know the audience is looking for something different. But that would, I would never write the same story for both magazines because they're looking for something different. So the story needs to be something different. But once I know the kind of story I'm writing, I'm just trying to write a story that I think people will like. And it's no particular person other than whoever the main audience will be.
So Bill asks, do you always know how a story will end before you start, and how important are endings?
And endings are everything. I can't tell you how many stories. Well, until very recently, I bought 52 stories a year for Black Cat Weekly. And because of federal government downsizing and resulting financial crunch at the publishers, I've been downsized myself to 12 stories a year instead of 52. Um, but so I, you, I sometimes will ask authors to write something for me for a particular reason, but often I spend a lot of time, I have spent a lot of time reading anthologies and magazines, looking for stories that I love, that I want to, be like Santa Claus and send an email going, surprise, I loved your story. Can I buy rights to it? Because that's much easier than having somebody send me a story and me going, oh, no. Then having to write back and go, no. I mean, that's never any fun. Never
Right.
fun to write it and never fun to receive an email like that. So, when I'm reading, I can't tell you how many times that I'll be reading a story and I'll be like, oh, this is good, this is good, this is good. And then I get to the end and I'm like, that's the end? Really? It's just, sometimes stories just peter out or it just doesn't have the emotional resonance or the surprise or whatever, you're hoping for from the end. And if you have to focus, well, I mean, you should want your first every story to hit you want a good beginning, you want it to move along, you want to have interesting characters and everything, but focus on that end because that is what will stick with the reader and that is what will make them think, ooh, I want to read something else by this author.
Which kind of brings us to the twist, right? The twist at the end or near the end. How do you what makes a good twist effective? Because there isn't there sort of a this is sort of your editor's hat here, but you know, you need a twist
Maybe,
at times, but you don't want to force that
right?
moment. So what in your mind, what makes it the most effective?
Yeah, a twist to work has to be earned. So you want to, and it might be, you might figure out as you're writing near the end, ooh, this will be my twist. But you can't just write it and end that way. You have to go back earlier in the story and massage things in. So when you get to the end, the ending and even maybe the twist will be something that the reader will think, oh, I should have seen that coming because she hinted at it this way and this way and that way, or maybe on page 1 and on page 4 and on page 10. But hopefully I didn't see it coming. What you don't want is a twist that just comes out of nowhere. And I'll be very honest. So I have a story called Dead and Buried Treasure, and it appeared in an anthology called a Halloween anthology, All Hallows Evil. And it has a twist at the end that was a cheat because I didn't earn that twist. And it just kind of turned the story upside down. And it was a fun ending, but it was a cheat. And I looked at it actually a couple of years ago thinking, is there a way I could fix this story? And I couldn't figure out how to fix it. Because it flowed really nicely, but it was a cheat. And I'm sure some readers were unhappy with me, just as I have been unhappy with authors when I get to the end and I'll be like, well, what do you mean that's the killer? There wasn't a single hint throughout the whole freaking book. And I have gone back and reread books thinking, did I miss it? And no, it's not there.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, you do feel a little cheated when that happens, even if it's a good one. You
yeah,
even if it's clever,
yeah.
but you have to plant the seeds, right?
Yeah. I have the story in Beauty and the Biatch. Again, I'm going to ruin this for anybody who hasn't read it, but the twist at the end is so one of the main characters is this girl who went through a phase when she was a kid as lying all the time. And everybody came to know her as a liar. And she lost a lot of friends and she went to therapy. And even though she tries really hard these days to always tell the truth, that still just, it drags at her. Um, so at the end, when she saves her new best friend from being murdered by her old best friend. And she tricks her old best friend into admitting what she did on tape, although the friend doesn't know she's being taped. Um, so when they're in the principal's office and she's explaining what happens, the principal says, well, um, where's the proof? He says, there is no proof, Meryl. It's just your word. And she thinks, well, everybody knows what that's worth. But then she pulls out her tape recorder and she's like, no, well, her phone. And she's like, no, I have the proof. And we saw her with her phone several times throughout the story, using her phone for many different reasons, including to record something. So it hopefully was a surprise, and yet it was oh yeah, I should have saw that coming.
Um, so yeah, I think that to me, that's the hardest thing to do in a short story because you only have this so much real estate, right? And I think that's in a novel, I think it's easier to kind of plant those seeds a little bit and then sort of move on. But in a short story, I mean, I'm hoping that everyone is reading every word. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes when I'm reading a novel, I do blip a little bit. I don't know if anyone else is guilty of that. But in a short, but in a short story, hopefully it's short enough that everyone really is paying attention all the way through. And when it's done well, it's just so satisfying.
Well, here's one way to do it. If you have something you want the reader to know, but you want to hide it from them at the same time, put it at the beginning, because the reader will be just settling into the story, and they won't be looking for clues as much as just trying to learn who the characters are. So here's an example. This is my newest story, and so this is from Keep It Dark in the anthology In Too Deep, crime fiction inspired by the songs of Genesis. And it starts telling you May 1972, and then this is dialogue. Time travel? Gary, you have got to be one of the most gullible bastards I've ever met. My coworker Kenny laughed, his wavy brown hair skimming his shoulders. So, time travel, sorry, I'm ruining the story for you, is an important element of this. But I think most people, when they read this, they will read this thinking, okay, this opening shows that Kenny's an, Kenny's a jerk. And Gary possibly is indeed gullible because who would think time travel could actually be real? But in this story, it is. So that there's that hint buried right there that you don't even know it's important. You just think it's there for one reason, but it's actually there for multiple reasons.
You once actually told me I think it was at Malice a year or two ago. You told me that you always try to give your character uh, a defining physical
Oh, yeah.
characteristic. So is that the brown hair? Is it like the long brown hair in that one?
Um, oh God, I don't remember. Maybe. I was also trying to show the time. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
1972, longer hair. But yes, I often tell them, wearing my editor's hat, I often will tell my clients, you want to give your readers, each character, at least one memorable characteristic. Um, so that, if you just say somebody had blonde hair, well, lots of people are blonde. But if you say somebody had Shirley Temple curls, well, that you will remember. Well, maybe not Shirley Temple, that seems dated, but you know what I mean.
Right. You clutch your pearls and you talk about Shirley Temple girls. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That so actually that brings me to the dialogue, right? Because we all are at different stages in our lives, but we want to write about every character and every kind of group out there. So do you have any good strategies for writing authentic dialogue or to ask it the other way, what would you try to stay away from? What would you tell yourself or others to try to not to do with dialogue?
I don't know if I tell anybody not to do anything. I think for dialogue, you read aloud. Well, this works for me at least. Read aloud. Um, you might wait. Some people might wait until they're done. I often will. I'll write a few paragraphs and then I'll go back and I'll read them out loud. And especially if there's dialogue. Oh, although even that, because narration is all voice. So I'll read the whole thing aloud and I'll try to see you can hear if the characters sound differently, if something sounds wooden, if you have any echoes going on. Um, and it also can be helpful because sometimes, even if I have my story plotted out, I'll get to a point and I'll be like, well, I don't know exactly what should come next. So if I get stuck, I go back to the beginning of the scene and I read it out loud. And not only am I looking for things to fix, I'm also immersing myself back into the story. And suddenly, sometimes I might get to the end of the scene and be like, ah, I know what comes next. But for dialogue, so read your stuff around aloud, read read other people. I can't tell you how much I learned from reading other people. In 2012, in 2011 I was laid off from my job and they gave me a boatload of money to go away. Um, so I took 2012 off and I just spent a year reading. And I know nobody else can probably do that, but I was very fortunate. And one of the things I did that year was I read one short story a day. Well, that was the goal. I think I ended up with 300-ish. At any rate, reading so many stories was like a personal little masterclass because by reading those stories, I saw what worked and I saw what didn't, and what I liked and what I didn't. And only by reading can I think reading so much lets good writing sink into you in a way that maybe reading craft books doesn't. You don't even realize what you're learning as you're learning it. But also, what other things you can do? Just listen to other people, listen to the way they talk. Some people might talk in very short sentences. Some people might, babble on, and some people might leave out verbs or whatever. People talk differently. And think about that when you're creating your character. They're not just going to look differently, they're going to talk differently. At least that's the goal. It's harder to do than to tell you to do, but that's the goal.
Yeah, I think the read aloud is a great um is a great tip because I think sometimes what happens is when I'm writing dialogue, I realize that everybody sounds exactly the same. Like everyone can't be like, hard-edged, whatever, or a wisecracking, whatever. You need different, you have to mix it up. The characters have to sound like themselves.
Yeah.
But when you're writing it, you don't catch it. But sometimes if you read it out loud, that's really when you do.
Yeah.
Um, so I was actually fascinated when you were talking about having a theme in your short story, because I feel like this is something we don't talk often enough about, especially in a short story, you're really concentrating because you have to do a lot of things, right? You need to, it's a mystery. You have to have characters, and those characters have to have a voice, and it has to sound authentic and has to have a great twist. Um, I think you said that the theme came to you halfway through or two-thirds of the way through of your Anthony nominated
Yeah. A matter
story.
of trust. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, could you just talk a little bit about what theme is and how you would relate, how important you think it is for a short story?
Um, I w especially if you're a newer writer, I wouldn't get all bogged down in having to have a theme. Sometimes just getting from A to Z with your plot is enough. Um, but a theme sometimes is what you're trying to say without saying it. So, okay, so my story that was in Murder Neat, which is the anthology up for the Anthony, and it just won the Derringer a couple weeks ago. Um, my story is called Never Have I Ever, and well, it's about a group of college kids who are at a bar um, in 1989, and they're drinking, and um, the story. Oh, God. The story all takes place on one evening, but there are a lot of flashbacks. So you see stuff that happened to the main character over, well, not as much flashbacks as her remembering them in present time. So I was trying to show what's happening at the bar and what they're talking about, but I was also trying to show the ramifications of date rape. So the story was what happened at the bar and how somebody ended up dead at the end. But the theme was date rape and abortion and all that stuff. I don't know if that I don't know if you call abortion a theme, but it was a message I wanted to send about why. Oh, well, I don't usually like to talk about politics, but it's important to me why I think that's such an important right for women, to be able to control their lives, and that was a message I was trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful story.
Thank you.
Um, and again, you do it so well, but I guess you really did answer my question, which is, maybe not try to force a theme for those of us who are trying to, walk before we run here. Because there are a lot of moving parts on the just getting the story down.
Yep.
Um, so I have another question. Oh, so when you read all of those books, like all those short stories, I'm assuming they're, were all different authors. Do you ever find that their voices, the author's voices, kind of creep into your own work? That's a question from Bill.
Yeah. So I know I'd say a large majority of authors I know will say that when they're writing, they don't read fiction because they don't want to be influenced by other authors. But I say bring it on. I am happy to be influenced by other people. I am happy to learn from other people and to grow. And I don't think it's stealing. I think it's just being, influenced. When I wrote my story that was up for the Agatha Anthony McCavity didn't win any of them last year, Real Courage. I was reading Megan Abbott when I started writing that story, and her style influenced the way I approached it. And I know I had a story that came out a few years ago, and there was one sentence as I was writing it, I thought, well, that sounds like Art Taylor. And I don't mind that because it was a way of showing something that I don't know if I would have done as well. And I read what other people do, and if I think it works well, I bring it into my repertoire and I find a way to make it my own. So yeah, I find them creeping in, but not I don't think it's any way that anybody really would go, oh my God, that's Art Taylor writing. I think it was just art I learned from art and I made it my own. And I think I say more power to you. I encourage you to do that.
Quick plug for the June Crime Craft. We're actually having Art Taylor on talking about first two pages. So hope you join us on that one. He's wonderful.
He is.
Um, let's see, here's another question. How many characters could you build into a story, and how many is too much in a short story?
I don't think there's a set number. It's as many as you need, but not more than that. So if you have, if you have a dozen characters and you only, sometimes you can have one character do what you otherwise have three characters doing. So just have one character do it. Every character you create should be there for a reason. Um, and if they don't have a good reason, then cut them out.
Yeah, I'm actually very guilty of this. I'll write a story and then I'll go back and I'll read it and I'll be like, okay, I don't need grandma, right? I have mom, I don't need grandma, or I don't need the best friend, I have the dog or whatever it is, because they're supposed to do specific things, right? And if
Yeah.
not, they can't take up that room in the short story.
But yeah, so in Beauty and the Biatch, there was what, two point of view characters, three main characters, and a few minor characters. But in The Postman Always Flirts Twice, there was what, six or seven, you know, six or seven, because it was a whodunit. You can't write a whodunit with just, two suspects because that's kind of boring. So you need more. And each one is going to give a little hint, give a clue to bring, or not. So you have to think about what you're trying to do and then go from there.
And that actually brings us to our next question from Doug, which is, what fraction of stories do you see that are mysteries such as whodunits, versus a crime story, which are more character focused?
Um, oh no. These days, they're probably more crime stories than whodunits. I know I've heard Janet Hutchings and Linda Landrigan. Janet's the immediate past editor of Ellery Queen, and Linda's the editor of Alfred Hitchcock. And I've heard them both say that they don't see as many whodunits these days as they used to. Um, but I'd like to point out that I don't think a whodunit doesn't has to be story focused. I mean, it is story focused, but you can have a lot of character in a story. And I think one of the reasons that my Postman story, which won the Agatha last month, was so well received is because it was very character driven.
Right, right. And voicey and twisty. And there was a
All of
theme.
those things.
And all those things.
You
Yeah.
try at least.
Um, and I guess I think we touched on this, but I think that I just want to ask also, just for my own personal edification, just about revision. When do you know that a story is as close to being done as it can possibly be? What, you know, how many, how much do you give it to other people to read? Is this just from yourself? Do you recommend that you have other people read?
I think the way this is going to vary obviously from person to person, and it could very well vary as you progress in your career. When I first started out, I was in a critique group and they saw every story and then I would revise and then they saw it again. And I wouldn't do that today. I would show it to somebody once and then that would be it. And sometimes I send things out without showing them to anybody. Not usually, but sometimes, because I've come to trust myself a lot more than I did at the beginning. And at the beginning of my career, I remember I submitted a story to Ellery Queen and it didn't get in. I can't tell you how many stories I submitted to them over the years before they finally took one. Um, and back then, their submission rules said, don't use italics. If you want something italicized, underline it. And I realized after I mailed, US mailed in my story that, oh my God, I hadn't underlined, I used italics. And when I got rejected, I thought, I bet that was the reason. And that surely was not the reason. So you can fret about little things, but in the end, what's going to decide whether a story is taken or not is whether a story is well written and whether it's too similar to something else that they already have and whether it's on theme. It's not going to be something little like that. But I really thought at the beginning that I had to be absolutely perfect. So I stressed over all this stuff. Um, and today, I mean, yeah, I try very hard to make sure my stuff is perfect. But if I have a typo, as long as I don't have a typo on every page, oh well, life goes on.
Well, Barb, I just want to thank you for today. I thought we had some great questions from our members. I think that you really taught us so much. Just your perspective, both as a writer and an editor, was just so invaluable. So I just really want to thank you for joining us and giving us your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. I see a question. Andy asked if they want EQ and HMM, do they want more whodunits? And yes, I think they do. But that said, after Linda said that a few years ago, I wrote a whodunit and I sent it to her and I thought they need more whodunits. And then she said no. So I was like, what the hell?
You
So,
never know, right? Because
yeah,
like
you
you
never
said,
know.
could be themes that they're looking for. Who knows?
Maybe it just wasn't that, I, the first story that I ever sold to Linda was a whodunit. But it had a supernatural element to it. And I had first sent it to Ellery Queen. And when Janet rejected it, she said, well, this isn't really a mystery, is it? And it was because of the supernatural element. I know that now. But I sent it to Linda, and Linda bought it and put it on the cover.
Wow,
So
right.
you just never know. Um,
That's what makes this business so interesting, right?
yeah.
The intangibles,
Yeah, nerve-wracking, interesting.
nerve-wracking,
Pick your
interesting.
adjective.
Well, like I said, thank you again for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. And yeah, if there are any more questions, I'll just take a quick look. If not, We'll see everyone, I hope, next month when our Taylor joins us for the first 2 pages.
If I could just add one thing, I blog every third Tuesday at Sleuthsayers, and not always, but I often write about craft.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
yeah, pop on by it. In fact, I spent a couple of hours prepping today, and I wrote some stuff down that I might end up writing about there at some point. So
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I'll definitely check that out. Thank you so
Tell
much.
us again what the location of that blog is.
it's I'll just type it in so everybody can see it. Let's see.
While you're
I don't
doing that, I
remember
want
if
to
it's
say
I
thank
don't remember
you.
if it's .com or .org at this point, but it's dot something.
Got it. Sleuth Sayers. Got it. Thank you so much, Barb and Kate. You did a wonderful job. Thank you again, Kate, our program chair. And Barb, you were fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a good time. I hope I was helpful.
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff here. Thank you so much.
All right.